The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. Wesley Armstrong's hands trembled as he wrapped another blanket around his shivering daughter, her fever spiking for the third night in a row. The ranch sat miles from the nearest hospital, and the blizzard had already buried the roads under 4 feet of snow. No ambulance was coming. No help was coming. Then he heard them, engines cutting through the storm like thunder. 25 motorcycles emerged from the white fury, and every single rider was a woman. Wesley's first instinct was to reach for the shotgun. His second was to notice the fear in their eyes, the ice coating their leather, the way their lips had turned blue. One decision. One frozen night. One act of trust that defied every instinct he had. If you believe a single moment of compassion can rewrite destiny, stay with this story. Because what happened the next morning would shake the ground beneath his boots and change everything he thought he knew about strangers. Loyalty, and what it means to truly be seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The thermometer outside read -18 degrees. But inside the ranch house, Wesley Armstrong's blood ran colder. His daughter Lily lay on the couch, her skin pale as the snow piling against the windows, her breathing shallow and labored. She'd been sick for 3 days now, and what started as a simple cough had turned into something far more dangerous. The fever had spiked an hour ago, and no amount of cold compresses seemed to bring it down. Wesley knelt beside her, pressing the back of his hand against her forehead. Burning. Still burning. He'd tried calling the clinic in Thornwick, the small town 40 miles south, but the lines were down. The cell towers were useless in this kind of storm. He'd tried the radio, static. He'd tried starting the truck to drive her out himself, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. The battery was frozen solid, and the driveway was buried under drifts taller than his waist. He was trapped. They were trapped. Lily's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "I'm right here, sweetheart," Wesley said, forcing his voice to stay calm even as panic clawed at his chest. "You're going to be okay. I promise." But promises felt hollow when you were miles from help, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The blizzard had rolled in fast and vicious, catching half the county off guard. The Weather Service had called it a once-in-a-decade storm. Wesley called it a nightmare. He stood and moved to the window, staring out into the white abyss. The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Wyoming wilderness, beautiful in the summer, brutal in the winter. He'd inherited it from his grandfather 5 years ago, right around the time everything else in his life had fallen apart. His wife had left without warning, walked out the door one morning, and never came back. No note, no explanation. Just gone. Lily had been 7 then, too young to understand why her mother didn't want them anymore. So Wesley had packed up what little they had and moved to the ranch. He thought the isolation would protect them, that the wide open spaces would give Lily room to heal. And for a while, it worked. They built a life here, just the two of them. He taught her how to ride horses, how to fix fences, how to read the sky for incoming weather. She taught him how to laugh again, how to see beauty in small things, how to keep going when everything felt impossible. But tonight, all of that felt fragile. One bad fever. One blocked road. One frozen truck. That's all it took to remind him how powerless he really was. The wind slammed against the house like a living thing, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. Wesley checked the fire in the wood stove, adding another log even though the room was already warm. He needed something to do with his hands, something to keep the fear from swallowing him whole. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him. A low rumble that rose and fell with the gusts. But then it grew louder, more distinct. Not wind, engines, multiple engines. Wesley's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. No one came out here, especially not in weather like this. The ranch was at the end of a dirt road that barely qualified as a road even in good conditions. In a blizzard, it was impassable. And yet, the sound grew closer. He moved to the front window, wiping away the condensation with his sleeve. Through the swirling snow, he saw them. Dark shapes emerging from the storm like ghosts, headlights cutting through the white. One motorcycle, 2, 5, 10, they kept coming. A procession of rumbling steel and black leather. Moving slowly but deliberately toward his house, Wesley's hand instinctively moved to the shotgun mounted above the door. He didn't grab it, not yet, but his fingers hovered near the barrel. Who were these people? What did they want? And why the hell were they riding motorcycles in the middle of a blizzard? The bikes pulled into a rough semicircle in front of the porch, engines idling in a low synchronized growl. Snow coated every surface, clinging to leather jackets and helmets, turning the riders into frost-covered statues. Wesley counted them, 25, all of them on Harleys. All of them women. He blinked, certain he'd miscounted or misunderstood what he was seeing. But no, every single rider was female. They sat motionless on their bikes, engines running, breath clouding in the freezing air. The lead rider dismounted first. She pulled off her helmet, revealing a face that was striking even half frozen. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, black hair pulled back in a tight braid. She couldn't have been more than 35. But there was something ancient in the way she moved. Deliberate and unhurried despite the cold. She took 2 steps toward the porch and stopped, her gaze locking onto Wesley through the window. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there waiting. Wesley's pulse hammered in his ears. Every instinct told him to lock the door, grab the gun, protect Lily at all costs. These were strangers. Dangerous strangers, judging by the leather and the bikes and the sheer audacity of riding through a killer storm. But then Lily coughed behind him, a wet, rattling sound that made his stomach drop. He turned to see her shivering violently, the blankets doing nothing to stop the tremors. When he looked back out the window, the woman was closer now, standing at the base of the porch steps. She raised one hand slowly, palm out, a gesture that was unmistakably non-threatening. Then she pointed to herself, to the other riders, and then to the house. The message was clear: we need help. We need shelter. Please. Wesley's jaw clenched. He didn't know these women. Didn't know what they were running from or running toward. Didn't know if letting them in would save his daughter or put her in more danger. But he looked at their faces, blue-lipped and desperate, ice clinging to their eyelashes. He looked at the storm raging behind them, a wall of white that promised death to anyone caught in it. And he looked at Lily, so small and fragile on the couch, needing warmth and safety just as much as they did. One decision. One frozen moment. One choice that would change everything. Wesley Armstrong took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it wide. 5 years ago, Wesley Armstrong had been a different man. He'd lived in a small house in Belridge, a town just big enough to have a grocery store and a gas station. He'd worked construction, good honest work that paid the bills and left him tired enough to sleep at night. His wife Sarah had worked at the library, and on weekends they'd take Lily to the park or out for ice cream. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was theirs. Then one Tuesday morning in October, he woke up and Sarah was gone. Not dead, not kidnapped. Just gone. Her closet was half empty. Her toothbrush was missing. The photo of them on their wedding day that used to sit on the nightstand had been turned face down. No note. No explanation. No warning. Wesley had called everyone he could think of. Her parents claimed they didn't know where she was. Her friends said the same. He filed a missing person report, but the police found her within a week. She was 3 states away, living with a man she'd apparently been seeing for months. When the officer asked if she wanted to come home, she'd said no. When they asked if she wanted to see her daughter, She'd said no to that too. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. Wesley had tried to hold it together for Lily's sake. He kept going to work, kept packing her lunches, kept showing up at parent-teacher conferences. But inside he was hollow. The rejection hadn't just hurt. It had broken something fundamental in him. The part that believed in trust, in permanence, in the idea that love could be relied upon. Then his grandfather died and left him the ranch. Thornwick Valley Ranch, 200 acres of Wyoming wilderness that had been in the family for 3 generations. Wesley had visited it maybe twice as a kid, remembered it as a dusty, windswept place that seemed too big and too lonely for anyone to actually live in. But when the lawyer handed him the deed, something shifted. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was just the knowledge that he needed to get Lily as far away from Belridge as possible. Somewhere she wouldn't have to walk past the park where her mother used to push her on the swings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They moved in the middle of winter. The house was in rough shape, drafty and outdated, but it had good bones. Wesley threw himself into fixing it, patching the roof, replacing broken windows, reinforcing the porch. Physical work gave him something to focus on besides the ache in his chest. And slowly, painfully, the ranch became home. He learned how to run the place, how to maintain the fences and care for the small herd of horses his grandfather had left behind. He wasn't a natural rancher, but he was stubborn, and stubborn counted for a lot out here. Lily adjusted too, faster than he'd expected. She loved the horses, loved the wide open sky, loved the way you could see stars at night without any city lights to drown them out. They built routines. Breakfast at sunrise, chores in the morning, homeschooling at the kitchen table in the afternoon, dinner by the fire, bedtime stories that turned into bedtime conversations as Lily got older. It wasn't the life Wesley had imagined, but it was a good life. A quiet life. A safe life. Or at least, it had been until 3 days ago when Lily started coughing. At first, he hadn't worried. Kids got colds. It was winter. These things happened. But the cough got worse, deep and wet, and then came the fever. He'd given her medicine, kept her hydrated, watched her like a hawk. When the fever spiked the first time, he'd almost driven her to the clinic in Thornwick, but she'd insisted she felt better and he believed her. Now he cursed himself for that decision. He should have taken her when he had the chance, before the storm hit, before the roads became impassable. But hindsight was useless. All he could do now was try to keep her warm and pray the fever broke before something worse happened. The ranch sat at the edge of the Bighorn Basin, surrounded by rolling hills and sparse pine forests. In the summer, it was beautiful. In the winter, it was unforgiving. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles away. The town of Thornwick was 40. The hospital was 60. Out here, you learned to be self-sufficient, because help wasn't coming quickly, and sometimes it wasn't coming at all. Wesley had always known the risks. He'd prepared for them, stockpiling food and firewood, keeping the generator maintained, making sure the first aid kit was fully stocked. But you couldn't prepare for everything. You couldn't prepare for your daughter's fever refusing to break. You couldn't prepare for the worst blizzard in a decade. And you sure as hell couldn't prepare for 25 women on motorcycles showing up at your door in the middle of the night. The ranch house itself was a 2-story structure with a stone fireplace, wooden beams, and large windows that let in plenty of light when the sun was out. Right now, those windows showed nothing but white. The barn sat about 50 yards from the house, barely visible through the snow. Beyond that, the pastures stretched out toward the mountains, all of it buried under a blanket of ice. It was a lonely place, but Wesley had come to appreciate the loneliness. It meant no one could hurt them. No one could leave them. No one could disappoint them. Out here, it was just him and Lily against the world. And that felt manageable. Until tonight. Wesley stood in the doorway. Cold air rushing past him as the 25 women filed in one by one, silent and efficient. They didn't speak, didn't make demands. They simply entered, shaking snow from their jackets, pulling off gloves with stiff fingers, their faces etched with exhaustion and cold. The lead woman was the last to enter. She paused in the doorway, meeting Wesley's eyes with a look that was equal parts gratitude and wariness. She nodded once, a small gesture of respect, then stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Wesley locked it, his hand lingering on the deadbolt. 25 strangers were now in his home, and he had no idea who they were or what they wanted. But Lily was still on the couch, still shivering, still burning with fever, and for better or worse, they were all in this together now. The silence inside the house was almost as loud as the storm outside. 25 women stood scattered throughout the living room, their leather jackets dripping melted snow onto the hardwood floor, their breath still coming in short, visible puffs despite the warmth from the wood stove. They didn't touch anything, didn't sit down, didn't speak. They just stood there, waiting, as if they were guests in a museum rather than refugees from a blizzard. Wesley felt the weight of their presence like a physical thing, pressing against his chest. He'd expected chaos, noise, demands. Instead, he got discipline, order, respect. It threw him off balance. The lead woman stepped forward, pulling off her gloves with slow, deliberate movements. Up close, she looked even more striking. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was a scar on her left cheek, thin and pale, barely visible in the firelight. She wore a leather vest over a thermal shirt, and on the vest was a patch, a silver wolf surrounded by flames. "My name is Harleys," she said, her voice low and steady. "Harleys Branville. We're part of the Silver Howl Riders, out of Montana." Wesley didn't respond immediately. He was too busy watching the other women, cataloging their movements, looking for threats. But all he saw was exhaustion. Some of them were shivering violently. Others had their arms wrapped around themselves, trying to preserve warmth. One woman in the back had ice crystals frozen to her eyelashes. "Montana's a long way from here," Wesley finally said, his voice guarded. "We were heading south," Harleys replied. "Annual ride to raise money for women's shelters. We've been on the road for 6 days." She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on Lily for a moment before returning to Wesley. "We knew the storm was coming, tried to outrun it. Obviously, we failed." Wesley's jaw tightened. "You should have found shelter earlier. Town's 40 miles south." "We tried," Harleys said, and for the first time, a hint of frustration crept into her voice. "Roads were blocked. Visibility was zero. We saw your lights from the main road and took a chance." She paused, then added, "If you want us gone, we'll go. But I'm asking you, please. Just until the storm passes. We won't cause trouble." Wesley looked past her at the other women. Some of them met his eyes. Others stared at the floor. None of them looked dangerous. They just looked cold, scared, and desperate. Then Lily coughed again, that same wet, rattling sound that had been haunting him for days. Every head in the room turned toward the couch. Harleys's expression shifted, concern replacing the wariness. "She's sick," Harleys said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Fever," Wesley admitted, his voice tight. "I can't get her to a doctor. Roads are buried." Harleys turned to the group. "Faith," she called out. A woman near the back stepped forward. She was shorter than the others, maybe mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She wore wire-rimmed glasses that were still fogged from the cold. "I'm a nurse," Faith said, moving toward the couch without waiting for permission. "May I?" Wesley's first instinct was to say no, to put himself between this stranger and his daughter. But then he looked at Lily's pale face, at the way her chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths, and he nodded. Faith knelt beside the couch, pulling a small flashlight from her jacket pocket. She checked Lily's eyes, felt her forehead, listened to her breathing. Wesley hovered close, watching every movement, ready to intervene if anything felt wrong. "How long has she had the fever?" Faith asked, her tone professional and calm. 3 days. Spiked tonight. Any other symptoms? Rash? Vomiting? No, just the cough and the fever. Faith nodded, continuing her examination. She felt along Lily's neck, checking for swollen glands, then listened to her chest again. After a long moment, she sat back on her heels. "It's probably bronchitis," Faith said. "Maybe early pneumonia. She needs antibiotics, but without getting her to a hospital, the best we can do is keep her hydrated, keep the fever down, and keep her warm." She looked up at Wesley. "Do you have any medication here? Ibuprofen? Acetaminophen?" "Both," Wesley said. "I've been giving her ibuprofen every 4 hours." "Good. Keep doing that. Alternate with acetaminophen if the fever doesn't come down." Faith pulled a small first aid kit from her jacket. "I have some cough suppressant here that might help her sleep. And I brought extra antibiotics, just in case. Their broad spectrum should help with the infection." Wesley stared at her. "You carry antibiotics on a motorcycle ride?" Faith gave him a small, tired smile. "I carry a lot of things. You'd be surprised what people need when you're on the road for days at a time." She handed him 2 small bottles. One labeled with medical shorthand Wesley didn't fully understand. The other a familiar brand of cough medicine. "Give her this now, and the antibiotics twice a day with food. She should start improving within 24 hours." Wesley took the bottles, his hands trembling slightly. Relief flooded through him, so intense it made his knees weak. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rough. Faith nodded, then stood and moved back toward the group. Orlis was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "We'll stay out of your way," Orlis said. "If you have somewhere we can sleep, a barn, a shed, anything, we'll take it. We don't need much." "We'll take it. We don't need much." Wesley looked around the room. 25 women, all of them soaked and freezing, all of them looking at him with varying degrees of hope and resignation. The house wasn't big. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a small guest room on the main floor that doubled as storage. The barn was an option, but it was cold out there. Too cold for people who'd just spent hours riding through a blizzard. He thought about his grandfather, who'd built this place with his own hands and always said a ranch was only as good as the people who passed through it. He thought about Sarah, who'd walked away without looking back, and how that had taught him to build walls high and keep strangers out. And he thought about Lily, lying on the couch with medicine from a stranger who'd appeared out of a storm like some kind of miracle. "You can stay," Wesley said finally. "There's space upstairs and the guest room. The couch is taken, obviously. Barn's too cold. I'll get blankets." The relief that washed over the group was almost palpable. Some of the women let out long, shaky breaths. Others closed their eyes briefly, as if offering silent thanks. Orlis stepped forward and extended her hand. "We owe you," she said simply. Wesley shook her hand, her grip firm despite the cold. "Just until the storm passes," he repeated. "Just until the storm passes," Orlis agreed. But as the women began to move, peeling off wet layers and gathering near the fire, Wesley had the strangest feeling that he'd just set something in motion. Something bigger than shelter from a storm. He didn't know what it was yet, but he could feel it in the air, in the way Orlis watched him, in the quiet efficiency of the women as they settled into his home. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Inside, 25 strangers and a desperate father waited for morning. And somewhere in the distance, 300 more engines were already warming up, preparing for a ride that would shake the foundations of Wesley. Armstrong's carefully isolated world, the house settled into an uneasy rhythm as the women dispersed throughout the rooms. Wesley watched from the kitchen doorway as they moved with practiced efficiency, helping each other out of frozen leather, wringing out soaked gloves, laying wet gear near the wood stove to dry. They spoke in low voices, respectful of the late hour and the sleeping girl on the couch. There was something almost military about their coordination, except it felt gentler somehow, more intuitive. Like they'd been through this before, knew each other's movements without needing to speak. Orlis directed traffic with subtle gestures. She pointed 3 women toward the stairs, sent 2 more to the guest room, and kept the rest in the living area. Within 10 minutes, the chaos of 25 cold, wet strangers had transformed into something resembling order. Wesley found himself, impressed despite his lingering wariness. He busied himself gathering blankets from the upstairs linen closet, pulling out every spare quilt and sleeping bag he owned. His grandfather had been a pack rat, thank God, and the closet was stuffed with bedding that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. He brought armfuls downstairs and distributed them wordlessly. The women accepted them with quiet thanks, some wrapping themselves immediately, others spreading them on the floor to create makeshift beds. Faith, the nurse, had stayed close to Lily. She sat in the armchair beside the couch, monitoring the girl's breathing, occasionally feeling her forehead. Wesley appreciated it even as it made him nervous. He wasn't used to anyone else caring for his daughter. For 5 years, it had been just the 2 of them. No help, no backup, no one to share the burden with. Her breathing's already easier, Faith said without looking up. The cough suppressant is working. Wesley nodded, not trusting his voice. He moved to the kitchen and started making coffee, needing something to do with his hands. The pot was old and temperamental, but after a few minutes, the smell of brewing coffee filled the house. Several of the women inhaled deeply, their expressions shifting from exhaustion to something approaching contentment. "That smells like heaven," one of them said. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark skin and short-cropped hair. Her leather vest had a patch that read Road Captain beneath the wolf insignia. "Cups are in the cabinet," Wesley said, gesturing. "Help yourselves." The woman stood and stretched, her joints popping audibly. "I'm Danessa," she said, moving to the cabinet. "Danessa Varan. Thank you for this. For all of it." Wesley grunted in acknowledgement, not quite ready for conversation. But Danessa didn't seem offended by his reticence. She poured coffee into 2 mugs, added sugar from a bowl on the counter, and handed one to Wesley without asking if he wanted it. "You look like you could use this more than any of us," she said with a slight smile. He took the mug, surprised by the gesture. The coffee was strong and hot, burning his tongue slightly, but it felt good, grounding, real. "How long have you been writing?" Wesley asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. 12 years, Danessa replied. "Started after my divorce. Needed something that was just mine, you know? Something no one could take away." Wesley understood that more than he cared to admit. He sipped his coffee and watched as other women began to gravitate toward the kitchen. They moved slowly, respectfully, waiting for permission before taking cups or adding cream. One by one, they introduced themselves. Emily, a blonde woman with laugh lines around her eyes, worked as a teacher in Billings. Mia, younger with multiple piercings, was a tattoo artist. Hannah had kind eyes and worked at an animal shelter. Zoe was a single mother of 2 teenagers. Allison ran her own construction company. Each name came with a small detail, a glimpse into lives that existed beyond the leather and the bikes. Wesley found himself listening despite his better judgment. These weren't the dangerous strangers he'd feared. They were teachers and mothers and nurses and business owners. Women who'd chosen to spend their free time riding across state lines to raise money for people who needed help. "Why women's shelters?" he asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could stop it. The room went quiet. Several women exchanged glances. It was Arliss who answered, stepping into the kitchen with her own mug of coffee. "Because most of us have been in one," she said simply. "At some point in our lives, we needed a place to go. A safe place." The Silver Howl Riders started 15 years ago, when 3 women decided to combine their love of motorcycles with raising money for the shelters that saved their lives. Now there are chapters in 6 states. 230 members total. Wesley absorbed this information slowly. He looked at the women gathered in his kitchen, saw them differently now. Survivors, fighters, people who'd been broken and put themselves back together. "How much do you usually raise?" he asked. "Last year, we raised $60,000 across all our rides," Danessa said with obvious pride. "This year, we're hoping for 75. We've got sponsors, donation stations at every stop, online fundraising. It adds up." Wesley nodded slowly. He glanced toward the living room where Lily still slept, her breathing steadier now thanks to Faith's medicine. These women had literally brought healing into his home. Antibiotics he didn't have. Medical knowledge he lacked. Help he desperately needed, but had been too isolated to ask for. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Arliss raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For assuming the worst when you showed up." A slight smile touched Arliss's lips. "We're used to it. 25 women on Harleys in the middle of the night. We know how it looks. But you opened your door anyway. That takes courage, or stupidity," Wesley muttered. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Arliss replied. The storm continued to rage outside, rattling the windows and piling snow against the house. Wesley moved to the front window and peered out into the darkness. He could barely see the outline of the motorcycles, already half buried in drifts. The visibility was zero. No one was going anywhere until this thing passed. "How long do you think the storm will last?" he asked. Danessa pulled out her phone, checking a weather app even though the signal was non-existent. "Last update I got before we lost service said it would blow through by morning. Should clear up by noon." Morning. Wesley could manage until morning. He just had to keep everyone warm, keep everyone fed, and keep Lily's fever down. Simple enough in theory. In practice, he had 25 unexpected guests, a sick daughter, and a growing sense that his carefully controlled world was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. One of the women, a petite brunette named Tessa, approached him hesitantly. "I noticed you've got horses in the barn. Do they need anything? Water? Food?" Wesley frowned. "How did you know about the horses?" "Saw the barn when we pulled up. And I grew up on a ranch. Recognized the smell." She smiled slightly. "I can help if you need it. Might be good to check on them. Make sure the storm isn't spooking them." Wesley considered this. The horses. He'd been so focused on Lily and the unexpected arrivals that he'd completely forgotten about them. They'd been fed earlier, but the barn could use checking. And truthfully, he could use a few minutes away from the intensity of 25 pairs of eyes watching his every move. "All right," he said. "Let's go." He grabbed his heavy coat and boots, and Tessa did the same with her gear. Arliss gave him a questioning look, and he nodded toward Lily. "Keep an eye on her?" "Of course," Arliss said. "Of course," Arliss said. Wesley and Tessa stepped out into the blizzard together. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his eyes water instantly. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Tessa off her feet, and Wesley grabbed her arm to steady her. They pushed forward together, heads down, fighting toward the barn that was barely visible through the white curtain of snowdot. When they finally made it inside, the relative quiet was shocking. The wind still howled outside, but the thick walls muffled it. The horses nickered nervously in their stalls, ears swiveling toward the door. Wesley moved to check them, running his hands along their flanks, speaking in low, soothing tones. Tessa worked beside him, competent and quick, filling water buckets and tossing hay into the feed troughs. She moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes before she spoke. "You've got good horses," she said. "Well cared for." "My grandfather's," Wesley replied. "Inherited them with the ranch. You ride?" "When I have time. Mostly they're Lily's. She loves them." Tessa nodded, stroking the nose of a bay mare. "Kids and horses go together. There's something healing about it." Wesley didn't miss the use of the word healing, as if Tessa knew something about needing to heal. He wanted to ask but held back, aware that he'd already learned more about these women in 2 hours than he'd learned about anyone in 5 years of isolation. "What brought you all the way out here?" he asked instead. "Montana to where, Texas?" "New Mexico," Tessa said. "Albuquerque. There's a new shelter opening there, and we wanted to make a big donation at the grand opening. Show support. Let them know they're not alone." She paused, then added softly, "I stayed at a shelter like that once. 8 years ago. My husband was not a good man. The shelter gave me a place to go when I finally found the courage to leave. Saved my life." Wesley stopped what he was doing, really looking at her. She was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and a quick smile. It was hard to imagine her needing to flee from anything. "I'm glad you got out," he said finally. "Me too," Tessa replied. "And now I ride with these women, and we make sure other people can get out too. It's the best thing I've ever done." They finished with the horses and stood for a moment in the barn, neither quite ready to face the storm again. Wesley felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. These women weren't just strangers passing through. They were people with stories, with pain, with purpose. Just like him. "We should get back," Wesley said. Tessa nodded, and together they pushed back out into the blizzard. By the time they reached the house, they were both covered in snow, frozen and breathless. But when they stumbled inside and were greeted by the warmth and the smell of coffee, and the sight of Lily sleeping peacefully, Wesley felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt less alone that morning, arrived not with sunlight, but with a slight lessening of the darkness. The storm continued its assault on the ranch, though the wind had dropped from a scream to a roar. Wesley woke on the couch where he'd finally dozed off around 3 in the morning, his neck stiff and his back aching. Around him, women slept on the floor, curled in blankets, some snoring softly, others silent as ghosts. Lily was still asleep, her forehead finally cooled to the touch. The fever had broken sometime in the night. Relief flooded through Wesley so intensely, it nearly brought tears to his eyes. Faith's medicine had worked. His daughter would be okay. He stood carefully, stepping over sleeping forms, and made his way to the kitchen. To his surprise, Harleys was already awake, standing by the window with a mug of coffee, staring out at the white landscape. "Couldn't sleep?" Wesley asked quietly. Harleys turned, and he saw exhaustion etched into her face. "Never could during storms. Old habit." Wesley poured himself coffee and joined her at the window. In the growing light, he could see the devastation the blizzard had wrought. Snow had drifted against the house in waves, some reaching nearly to the second-story windows. The motorcycles were completely buried. And the road, what little of it he could see, was impassable. "We're snowed in," Harleys said, voicing what they both knew. "Probably for another day or two, even after the storm passes. Plows won't make it out here for a while." Wesley nodded. He'd expected as much. "We've got food. Enough for everyone. Generators working if the power goes out. We'll manage." Harleys studied him for a long moment. "You're handling this better than most people would." "Don't have much choice," Wesley replied. "Besides, you saved my daughter's life. Least I can do is feed you for a few days." "We didn't save her life. Faith just helped with medicine." Same thing. They stood in silence for a moment before Arliss spoke again, her voice lower, more serious. Wesley, I need to tell you something. When we left Montana 6 days ago, we were supposed to check in with our national chapter every night. Let them know we're safe where we are, that kind of thing. But we lost cell service yesterday afternoon. They'll have been trying to reach us. When they couldn't, they would have activated our emergency protocol. Wesley frowned. What does that mean? It means every chapter within 500 miles is looking for us right now. They'll track our last known location, follow our route, send out search parties. It's what we do when one of our own goes missing. She paused, meeting his eyes. By tomorrow, there could be hundreds of riders heading this way. The weight of her words settled over Wesley like the snow outside. Hundreds? The Silver Howl riders take care of their own, always. We have 300 members who can ride at a moment's notice. More if they reach out to allied clubs. Arliss set down her mug. I need you to understand something. When they find us, and they will find us, it's going to be overwhelming. A lot of bikes. A lot of people. All of them coming to make sure we're okay. Wesley processed this, his mind racing. 300 motorcycles descending on his isolated ranch. It was almost impossible to imagine. Will they be angry? Think I did something to you? No, Arliss said firmly. Not once they see we're safe. But they'll want to meet you. Thank you. They'll be grateful. And when bikers are grateful, they show it in big ways. Before Wesley could respond, a sound cut through the howling wind. It was faint at first, then grew louder. A mechanical groan followed by a loud crack. Wesley's stomach dropped. The barn, he said, already moving toward the door. He and Arliss rushed outside, this time into a lighter snowfall, but with drifts so deep they had to wade through them. As they rounded the house, Wesley's worst fears were confirmed. Part of the barn roof had collapsed under the weight of the snow, caving in on the south side. He could hear the horses inside, panicking, their terrified whinnies cutting through the storm. The horses, Wesley shouted over the wind, already running toward the structure. Wait! Arliss grabbed his arm. The rest could come down. We need help. Wesley wanted to argue, wanted to charge in alone like he always did, but he knew she was right. They ran back to the house, bursting through the door and waking everyone with their urgency. The barn's collapsing, Wesley announced. I need help getting the horses out. The response was immediate. Women scrambled to their feet, pulling on boots and jackets, not asking questions, just moving. Within minutes, 15 of them were outside, forming a human chain from the barn to a small equipment shed that could serve as temporary shelter for the horses. Wesley led the way into the damaged barn, his heart pounding. The south wall had partially collapsed, and snow was pouring in through the gaping hole. 2 of the 4 horses were already free in the main area, wild-eyed and terrified. The other 2 were trapped in their stalls, blocked by fallen beams. Tessa, help me with these 2, Wesley ordered, falling into a leadership role born of desperation. Everyone else, get those 2 horses to the shed. Be careful, they're scared. The women worked with surprising calm, speaking softly to the panicked animals, guiding them out through the safe exit on the north side. Meanwhile, Wesley, Danessa, and Tessa worked to move the heavy wooden beams blocking the stalls. The wood was old and had splintered on impact, but it was still heavy, still dangerous. On 3, Wesley said, positioning himself. 1, 2, 3. They lifted together, muscles straining, boots slipping on the icy floor. The beam shifted, then moved, finally sliding aside enough to open the first stall. The horse inside, a gray gelding named Storm, bolted past them toward freedom. The second horse, Lily's favorite bay mare named Autumn, was trapped more securely. A larger beam had fallen at an angle, pinning the stall door shut. And worse, part of the roof above them was sagging ominously, creaking with the weight of accumulated snow. "This whole section's going to come down," Danessa said, eyeing the roof. "We need to move fast." More women appeared in the barn entrance, including Orlis. "What do you need?" "Rope," Wesley said. "And more hands. We need to pull this beam while someone opens the stall." They worked together, tying rope around the beam, everyone finding a position along the length. On Wesley's count, they pulled. The beam didn't budge. They tried again, putting their combined weight into it. This time it shifted slightly, groaning against the floor above them. The roof creaked louder. A shower of snow fell through a new crack. "One more time," Wesley said. "Everything you've got. Now. Everything you've got. Now." 20 women pulled as one. The beam scraped across the floor, moving inches, then feet, finally clearing the stall door enough for it to swing open. Tessa lunged forward, unlatching the door just as a horrible cracking sound filled the barn. "Get out!" Orlis shouted. "Now!" They ran. Wesley grabbed Autumn's halter and pulled her toward the exit, the mare fighting him at first, then following as the roof behind them gave way with a thunderous crash. They burst out of the barn just as the entire south section collapsed completely, sending up a massive cloud of snow and debris. Wesley stumbled to his knees in the snow, still holding Autumn's lead, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Around him, the women were picking themselves up, checking each other for injuries, their faces pale with adrenaline. "Is everyone okay?" Orlis's voice cut through the chaos. "Sound off." One by one, voices called out. "I'm good. All clear. I'm okay." No one was hurt. Somehow and possibly, no one was hurt. Wesley looked at the collapsed barn, at what remained of the structure his grandfather had built 40 years ago. Half of it was gone, crushed under snow and broken timber. But the horses were safe. All 4 of them were now secured in the equipment shed, frightened but unharmed. He turned to look at the women around him, these strangers who had just risked their lives for his animals without hesitation. Danessa was breathing hard, her hands on her knees. Tessa was helping another rider to her feet. Harleys was already moving through the group, assessing, leading, making sure everyone was accounted for. "Thank you," Wesley said, his voice rough. "All of you. Thank you." Orlis met his eyes across the snow. "We told you. The Silver Howl Riders take care of their own. And right now, that includes you." They trudged back to the house together, frozen and exhausted, but alive. As they filed inside and began the process of warming up again, Wesley realized something fundamental had shifted. These women weren't guests anymore. They weren't strangers. They were something else entirely, though he didn't quite have a word for it yet. Lily was awake when they came in, sitting up on the couch with clearer eyes and color back in her cheeks. She looked at the crowd of snow-covered women with curiosity rather than fear. "What happened?" she asked. "The barn collapsed," Wesley explained, kneeling beside her. "But everyone's okay. The horses are safe." Lily's eyes widened. "Even Autumn?" "Especially Autumn." Faith appeared with more medicine, checking Lily's temperature and listening to her lungs. "Much better," she announced. "Fever's gone. Lungs are clearing. You're going to be just fine, sweetie." Lily smiled, then looked at all the women gathered in the living room. "Who are all these people, Dad?" Wesley opened his mouth to answer, but Orlis spoke first, stepping forward with a gentle smile. "We're friends," she said simply. "We're the Silver Howl Riders. And we're very glad to meet you, Lily." Outside, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died down to a whisper. The snow slowed to scattered flurries. And somewhere in the distance, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the white landscape with gold. Morning had come. The storm was passing, and everything was about to change. The afternoon sun transformed the ranch into a blinding sea of white. Snowdrifts glittered like diamonds, and the sky, finally clear after 36 hours of relentless storm, stretched overhead in an impossible shade of blue. Inside the house, the atmosphere had shifted from tense survival to something warmer, more communal. Women who had started as strangers now moved around the space with easy familiarity, sharing stories, laughter, and the kind of comfortable silence that only came from having weathered something difficult together. Lily had taken to the visitors with surprising enthusiasm. Her fever broken and her energy returning, she sat cross-legged on the floor near the fireplace, sketching in a notebook while half a dozen women watched with genuine interest. She was drawing the barn before it collapsed, capturing it in careful pencil strokes, adding details from memory. "You're really talented," Mia said, leaning over to get a better look. The tattoo artist's arms were covered in intricate ink, colorful designs that told stories Lily kept asking about. "How old are you?" 12, Lily replied, adding shading to the barn's roof. "I like drawing buildings. And horses. And sometimes people, but faces are hard." "Faces are hard for everyone," Mia agreed. "That's why I mostly do flowers and skulls." Lily giggled at that, a sound that made Wesley's chest tighten with relief. He stood in the kitchen, ostensibly making lunch but mostly just watching his daughter interact with these women. Seeing her smile more in a few hours than she had in months, Tessa had taken over cooking duties, insisting that Wesley needed to rest after the barn rescue. She'd found ingredients in his pantry he'd forgotten about and was somehow turning them into a meal that smelled incredible. Several other women worked alongside her, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, moving with the easy rhythm of people who'd cooked together before. "Your daughter is wonderful," Emily said, appearing at Wesley's elbow with a cup of coffee. The teacher had kind eyes and an easy smile. "Bright, creative, resilient. You've done a good job raising her." Wesley accepted the coffee, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just try to keep her safe." "It's more than that," Emily said. "She's happy. You can see it in how she talks, how she draws, how she looks at you. That doesn't happen by accident." Wesley didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and took a sip of coffee. Emily seemed to understand his reticence and changed the subject. "How long have you been out here?" "At the ranch, I mean." 5 years. Since my grandfather died and left me the place. It's beautiful. Remote, but beautiful. That's why I chose it." The remote part. Emily studied him with the perceptive gaze of someone who'd spent years reading between the lines of what students said versus what they meant. "Running from something?" Wesley's jaw tightened. "Running towards something. Peace, quiet. A place where it's just me and Lily, and we don't have to depend on anyone else. How's that working out for you?" Emily asked gently, gesturing around the room full of women. Wesley followed her gaze. Harleys was helping Lily with her drawing, showing her how to create depth with cross-hatching. Danessa and Faith were engaged in an animated conversation about medical ethics. Allison was examining the structural damage to the house from the storm, taking notes on repairs that would need to be made. And everywhere he looked, there was life, energy, connection. "I don't know anymore," Wesley admitted quietly. Emily smiled. "Sometimes the things we run from have a way of finding us anyway. Just in different forms." Before Wesley could respond, Lily called out from across the room. "Dad, Orlis used to be a teacher too. She taught high school English in Missoula." Wesley raised an eyebrow at Orlis, who shrugged with a slight smile. "Past life," she said. "Before I figured out I was better at riding motorcycles than teaching teenagers to care about Shakespeare. What made you quit?" Lily asked with the blunt curiosity of someone her age. Orlis's expression shifted, becoming more serious. She glanced at Wesley as if asking permission to be honest. He nodded slightly. "I had a student," Orlis said. her voice quiet enough that only those nearby could hear. Bright girl, junior year, loved poetry. One day she stopped coming to class. I went to her house to check on her, and her father answered the door. He was drunk, angry. Told me to mind my own business. I left, but something felt wrong. I called social services, reported my concerns. She paused, her hand stilling on the sketch paper. They investigated, but found nothing they could act on. The girl came back to school 2 weeks later with bruises she said were from falling downstairs. I tried to help, tried to get her to talk to me, but she shut down. A month later, she ran away. Just disappeared. We never found her. The room had gone quiet. Even the women in the kitchen had stopped moving, listening. I quit teaching that year, Orlis continued. Felt like I'd failed her. Failed all of them, really. Started writing to clear my head, joined the Silver Howl Riders, and found out they raised money for shelters. Places where girls like my student could go, could be safe. It felt like something I could actually do. Something that mattered. Lily looked up at her with wide eyes. Do you think she's okay? Your student? I hope so, Orlis said softly. I really hope so. The vulnerability in that moment shifted something in the room. It was as if Orlis's honesty had opened a door, and one by one, other women began to share their own stories. Hannah, who worked at the animal shelter, had left an abusive marriage at 23 with nothing but the clothes on her back and her 2 cats. She'd lived in her car for 6 weeks before finding a shelter that would let her bring the animals. Now she devoted her life to making sure other people and their pets had somewhere safe to go. Zoe, the single mother, had been widowed at 30 when her husband died in a construction accident. The life insurance wasn't enough, the bills piled up, and she nearly lost her house. A local women's group had helped her get back on her feet, and now she rode with the Silver Howl Riders to pay that kindness forward. Howl Riders to pay that kindness forward. Allison, the construction company owner, had grown up in foster care, bouncing between 12 different homes before aging out of the system at 18. She'd slept on park benches and in shelters until a woman gave her a job sweeping floors at a construction site. That woman had seen potential in her, trained her, mentored her. 10 years later, Allison owned her own company and made a point of hiring women who needed second chances. Each story was different, but the thread running through all of them was the same: pain, struggle, someone offering help at the right moment. A decision to pass the help along to others. Wesley listened to all of it, feeling something crack open inside his chest. He'd spent 5 years convincing himself that isolation was safety, that depending on no one meant no one could hurt him or Lily. But these women, they'd all been hurt deeply, and their response wasn't to hide. It was to ride, to connect, to help. Lily had tears in her eyes by the time the stories finished. She stood up from her spot by the fire and walked over to Orlis, wrapping her arms around the woman's waist in a spontaneous hug. Thank you for helping people, Lily said. Her voice muffled against Orlis's leather vest. Orlis's arms came around her gently, and Wesley saw tears shine in the woman's eyes. Thank you for reminding me why we do it, she whispered back. The moment was broken by the sound of engines in the distance. Everyone froze. The sound grew louder, distinct even through the walls. Motorcycles. A lot of them. Orlis stood quickly, moving to the window. Her face transformed from soft vulnerability to sharp alertness. They found us, she said. Wesley joined her at the window, and his breath caught. Coming up the snow-covered road, moving slowly but steadily, was a line of motorcycles that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Dozens of them. No more than dozens, hundreds. How many? Wesley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Orlis pulled out her phone, which had finally regained service. It immediately began buzzing with messages and missed calls. She scrolled quickly, then looked up with an expression that was half awe, half concern. All of them, she said. Every rider who could make it. The entire national network mobilized when we went silent. She met Wesley's eyes. There are 312 motorcycles about to pull into your ranch. Wesley felt the blood drain from his face. 312. He looked at his small house, his collapsed barn, his isolated property that had never seen more than 3 visitors at a time. What do they want? He asked. Orlis put a hand on his shoulder. To make sure we're safe. To meet the man who sheltered us. To say thank you. She paused, then added with a slight smile. And when bikers say thank you, they don't do it quietly. Outside, the rumble of engines grew to a roar. The Silver Howl Riders had arrived. The sound was unlike anything Wesley had ever heard. 300 motorcycles idling in unison created a low, rumbling thunder that vibrated through the ground, rattled the windows, and seemed to shake the very air itself. Wesley stood on the porch, Lily beside him clutching his hand, watching as the seemingly endless line of bikes filled every available space around the ranch. They parked in organized rows, engines cutting off one by one until silence reclaimed the snow-covered landscape. Then the riders began to dismount. Wesley's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched hundreds of women remove their helmets, their breath clouding in the cold air, their eyes all turning toward the house, toward him. The weight of their collective attention was overwhelming. Like standing in front of a tidal wave and waiting for it to crash, Orlis stepped forward from the porch, raising her hand in a gesture that seemed both greeting and signal. The gathered riders responded immediately, raising their fists in unison. A silent salute that spoke of solidarity and recognition. A woman detached herself from the front line of bikes and walked toward the house. She was older than Orlis, maybe mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely and a leather jacket that had seen decades of hard roads. Her presence commanded respect, and the crowd parted naturally as she approached. Josie Warren, Orlis said quietly to Wesley. National President. She founded the Silver Howl Riders. Josie climbed the porch steps slowly, her eyes taking in everything with sharp assessment. She looked at the collapsed barn, at the 25 women gathered behind Wesley, at the man himself standing protectively in front of his daughter. When she finally spoke, her voice carried authority tempered with warmth. You must be Wesley Armstrong, she said, extending her hand. I've heard a lot about you in the last hour. Wesley shook her hand, surprised by the strength in her grip. Ma'am. Don't ma'am me, I'm not that old yet, Josie said with a slight smile. Though some days it feels like it. She glanced at Orlis. Report. Orlis straightened slightly, falling into what looked like an old habit of deference. We hit the storm 40 miles north of here. Zero visibility, roads impassable, temperatures dropping fast. We saw lights from the main road and made for them. Mr. Armstrong here opened his door to 25 strangers in the middle of a blizzard and asked for nothing in return. His daughter was sick, Faith added, stepping forward. High fever, possible pneumonia. I was able to provide antibiotics and treatment. She's recovering well. Josie's gaze shifted to Lily, softening noticeably. What's your name, sweetheart? Lily, she said quietly, half hiding behind her father. Lily Armstrong. That's a beautiful name. I'm Josie. She turned back to Wesley. You saved 25 lives last night, Mr. Armstrong. You understand that, don't you? If you hadn't opened that door, some of my riders wouldn't have made it through the night. Wesley shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone would do. No, Josie said firmly. You did what most people wouldn't. You took a risk. You trusted strangers. You shared what you had when you didn't have much to share. She paused, her expression becoming more intent. The Silver Howl Riders don't forget debts. We don't forget kindness. And we sure as hell don't forget the people who save our family. Behind her, the gathered riders raised their fists again. A wave of solidarity that sent chills down Wesley's spine. "We'd like to do something for you," Josie continued. "If you'll let us. We noticed your barn collapsed. We've got construction workers, carpenters, electricians, all kinds of skilled labor in our ranks. We can rebuild it. Better than before. Stronger." Wesley opened his mouth to protest, but Josie held up a hand. "Before you say no, understand something. We need to do this. Not for you, though you deserve it. For us. Because when someone saves our family, we respond. It's who we are. It's what we do. And denying us that, well, that would be like telling us our gratitude doesn't matter." Wesley looked at the sea of faces watching him. At Harleys and the other women who'd spent 2 days in his home. At Lily tugging on his sleeve with excited eyes. He thought about 5 years of proud isolation, of convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that accepting help was weakness, and he realized he'd been wrong. "Okay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you. I'd be honored." The cheer that went up from 300 women was deafening. Fists pumped in the air, voices joined in celebration, and several riders actually whooped with joy. Wesley couldn't help but smile. Caught up in the infectious energy of the moment, Josie pulled out a radio and began coordinating with military precision. "All right, listen up. I want structural teams assessing the damage. Supply runners to town for materials. Cooking crews setting up field kitchens. Medical stays on standby. Everyone else on clearing and prep. We've got daylight for another 4 hours. Let's make them count." The organized chaos that followed was extraordinary. Women dispersed in all directions, each seemingly knowing exactly what to do. Some headed to the collapsed barn, others to their bikes to retrieve tools and supplies Wesley didn't even know they carried. Several riders produced tablets and began sketching plans, conferring with Allison about structural integrity and design improvements. A tall woman with kind eyes and graying blonde hair approached the porch carrying a large insulated bag. "I'm Collie," she said with a warm smile. "Head of our mobile kitchen unit. I heard you've been feeding 25 unexpected guests. Thought you might need reinforcements." She opened the bag to reveal containers of prepared food, fresh bread, vacuum-sealed meats and cheeses, even boxes of cookies. "We always travel with supplies. You never know when you'll need to feed a crowd." Lily's eyes widened at the cookies. Collie noticed and winked, handing her a chocolate chip cookie the size of her hand. "Those are homemade. My grandmother's recipe." More women approached with offerings. Someone brought fresh medical supplies to restock Faith's depleted kit. Someone else had extra blankets and pillows. Another rider presented Wesley with a thick leather jacket, insulated and weatherproof, far better than his worn coat. "You can't rebuild a barn in that thin thing," the rider said matter-of-factly. "This'll keep you warm." Wesley found himself overwhelmed by the generosity, by the sheer scale of the response to one small act of kindness. He'd opened his door during a storm, and 300 women had ridden hundreds of miles to say thank you. Miles to say thank you. As the afternoon wore on, the ranch transformed. The collapsed barn was cleared of debris with remarkable efficiency. Damaged wood was sorted into salvageable and waste piles. Someone had already made a supply run to Thornwick, returning with lumber, nails, roofing materials, and power tools. By sunset, the foundation had been reinforced and new support beams were going up. Wesley worked alongside them, following instructions from women who knew far more about construction than he did. Lily stayed close, handing out water bottles and snacks, soaking up stories from riders who were more than happy to share. She learned about cross-country rides and charity events, about the bonds formed on the open road, about what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold, Josie called for everyone to gather. The work crews set down their tools, and the 300 riders formed a loose circle around the partially rebuilt barn. Josie stood in the center with Wesley and Lily beside her. Today we came together for one of our core principles: taking care of family. Wesley Armstrong isn't Silver Howell, but he saved 25 of our sisters without hesitation. That makes him family. That makes his daughter family. And family takes care of family. The riders responded with raised fists and a unified shout of agreement. Tomorrow we finish the barn, Josie continued. And then we ride on to complete our mission to Albuquerque. But tonight we celebrate. We celebrate survival, kindness, and the bonds that connect us all. Someone started a fire in a cleared area near the house. Someone else produced guitars and a harmonica. Food appeared from seemingly nowhere, spread out on makeshift tables. And as darkness fell and stars emerged in the clear Wyoming sky, 300 women and one father with his daughter shared a meal that felt less like a gathering and more like a homecoming. Wesley sat on the porch steps. Lily curled against his side, watching the scene unfold. Harleys joined them, settling on the step beside him with her own plate of food. Overwhelming? She asked with a knowing smile. That's one word for it, Wesley replied. You gave us shelter when we needed it most, Harleys said quietly. This is what we're giving you. Not just a barn, though we'll finish that, but something more. A reminder that you're not alone. That there are people who see your kindness and want to honor it. That isolation isn't the same as safety. Wesley looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted but content. He thought about the last 5 years, about the walls he'd built, about the fear that had driven him to this remote place. I was wrong, he said softly. About a lot of things. You were protecting your daughter, Harleys replied. That's not wrong. But maybe there are other ways to keep her safe. Ways that don't require cutting yourself off from everyone. Wesley nodded slowly, watching the firelight dance across the faces of women who had been strangers 48 hours ago, and now felt like something else entirely. The turning point had come, and there was no going back. Morning arrived with crystalline clarity. The storm had left the world scrubbed clean, and the sunrise painted everything in shades of pink and gold. Wesley woke early, as he always did, but this time to the sound of 300 women, already moving with purpose around his ranch. The work on the barn had resumed before dawn. Wesley pulled on the leather jacket he'd been given and stepped outside to find the structure nearly complete. The framework was solid, the walls were going up, and a team was already working on the roof. What would have taken him months to rebuild, alone was happening in a single day. But that wasn't the most remarkable thing. As Wesley walked around the property, he discovered that the riders hadn't stopped with the barn. Someone had repaired the fence line that had been damaged in the storm. Someone else had cleared the driveway all the way to the main road, an undertaking that should have been impossible with that much snow. The equipment shed had been reinforced. The house's drafty windows had been sealed with weather stripping. Even the broken step on the front porch that Wesley had been meaning to fix for 2 years had been replaced. We got a little carried away, Allison admitted when Wesley found her overseeing the roofing crew. But once we started, we just kept finding things that needed fixing. Wesley shook his head in amazement. I don't know how to thank you all. You already did, Allison replied. 2 nights ago, in a blizzard. This is just us returning the favor. By mid-morning, the barn was structurally complete. The roof was sealed, the walls were solid, and the interior had been divided into proper stalls for the horses. It was better than the original, stronger, and more weather-resistant. Someone had even installed better ventilation and improved lighting. Lily clapped her hands in delight when Faith led her into the new barn. It's perfect. Autumn's going to love it. The horses were brought from the equipment shed and settled into their new stalls. They seemed to sense the improvement, nickering contentedly and investigating their upgraded accommodations. Lily spent an hour brushing Autumn and telling her about all the amazing women who'd built her new home, but the revelations weren't finished. Around noon, a convoy of trucks arrived from Thornwick. Wesley frowned, confused about what more could possibly be needed. But when the trucks were unloaded, he understood. Food. Enormous quantities of food. Fresh produce, meat, dairy, canned goods, dry goods. Enough to fill his pantry 3 times over. "What is this?" Wesley asked as women began carrying boxes into the house. Josie appeared at his elbow. "Winter supplies. You're isolated out here, and the roads can be unpredictable. Consider it insurance." "I can't accept all this," Wesley protested. "It's too much." "It's already paid for," Josie said firmly. "And before you argue, understand that every chapter contributed. This isn't from one person, it's from 300. You'd have to reject all of us to turn it down." Wesley looked at the steady stream of supplies being carried into his home and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why go to all this trouble for someone you don't even know?" Josie turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Because 15 years ago, I was running from a man who'd put me in the hospital twice. I had $50 to my name, a broken arm, and nowhere to go. A woman I'd never met saw me at a gas station, saw the fear in my eyes, and gave me the keys to her cabin in Montana. Told me to stay as long as I needed. No questions asked. No judgment." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "I stayed there for 3 months, healed, found work, rebuilt my life. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to pay that kindness forward, I would. That's why the Silver Howl Riders exists. That's why we do what we do. And that's why 300 women rode through snow and ice to get here. Because someone showed kindness to one of us, and we never forget." Wesley felt tears prick his eyes. Around him, riders had stopped working to listen to Josie's words. Many of them nodded, their own stories of rescue and redemption written in their expressions. "You're not just some guy who opened a door," Josie continued. "You're proof that kindness still exists. That people still help strangers. That the world isn't as cold and cruel as it sometimes seems. And we need that proof. We need to celebrate it, honor it, make sure you know that what you did mattered." A rider Wesley didn't recognize stepped forward. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with bright red hair and nervous energy. "Can I say something?" Josie nodded. The young woman looked at Wesley with intense eyes. "My name is Lily. Yes, same as your daughter. Funny coincidence. 3 years ago, I was living on the streets. Homeless, addicted, had burned every bridge I'd ever had. A Silver Howl rider found me sleeping behind a dumpster, and instead of calling the cops, she bought me breakfast. We talked for 4 hours. She didn't judge me, didn't lecture me, just listened. Then she helped me get into rehab." Her voice grew stronger. "I've been clean for 2 years now. I have an apartment, a job, a life. And I ride with the Silver Howl because I want to be the person who buys breakfast for the next scared person sleeping behind a dumpster. Your story, what you did for Orlis and the others, it reminds me why this matters. Why we all keep riding, keep helping, keep believing in people." Other voices joined in, each sharing a moment when someone's kindness had changed their trajectory. A meal when they were hungry. A place to sleep when they were desperate. A word of encouragement when they were ready to give up. The stories poured out, a chorus of gratitude and transformation that left Wesley speechless. Finally, Orlis stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. "We have one more thing," she said quietly. "Something personal." She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a hand-carved wooden plaque. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood polished to a deep shine. Burned into the surface were words that made Wesley's breath catch. "Wesley Armstrong, Honorary Silver, Howl Rider for shelter given. Lives saved, hope restored. Below the text was the image of a silver wolf surrounded by flames. The same insignia on every rider's vest. "You're one of us now," Orlis said, her voice thick with emotion. "Forever. If you ever need anything, anywhere, anytime, you call us. 300 sisters will answer. 300 sisters will answer." Wesley took the plaque with trembling hands. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Everything he'd believed about isolation and safety, about not depending on others, about keeping the world at arm's length, had been shattered by the kindness of strangers who've become family. Lily appeared beside him, looking up at the gathered riders with shining eyes. "Does this mean we're not alone anymore?" she asked softly. Josie knelt down to Lily's level, her weathered face gentle. "Sweetheart, you were never alone. You just didn't know how many people were out here waiting to be your family." The emotion of the moment was broken by the roar of engines starting up. The riders were preparing to leave, to continue their journey to Albuquerque. But before they left, they formed an honor corridor. Their bikes lined up on either side of the driveway, creating a path from the house to the main road. Wesley and Lily walked through the corridor as 300 riders revved their engines in synchronized salute. Some riders reached out to shake Wesley's hand as he passed. Others saluted. A few had tears streaming down their faces. When they reached the end, Josie was waiting. "The barn's finished. Your supplies are stocked. The repairs are done," she said. "But the most important thing we're leaving you with is this. You're not isolated anymore. You're connected. To us, to this community, to something bigger than yourself. Don't forget that." Wesley nodded, not trusting his voice. One by one, the riders departed, their engines creating a symphony of farewell. They rode slowly, respectfully, each one taking a moment to look back at the ranch, at the man and girl standing together, at the symbol of what kindness could create. Orlis was the last to leave. She paused, her bike idling, and pulled something from her pocket. It was a cell phone, new and fully charged. "My number's already programmed in," she said, "along with Josie's and about 50 others. You call if you need anything. And I mean anything. Even if you just want to talk." Wesley took the phone, then surprised himself by pulling Orlis into a brief, awkward hug. She hugged him back, fierce and quick. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything." "Thank you for reminding me why we ride," Orlis replied. Then she gunned her engine and was gone, following the trail of bikes disappearing down the snowy road. Wesley and Lily stood in the sudden silence, watching until the last motorcycle vanished from sight. The ranch looked different now, transformed not just by repairs but by purpose, by connection, by the knowledge that they were part of something larger than themselves. "Dad?" Lily said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart?" "I'm glad you opened the door." Wesley looked down at his daughter, then at the plaque in his hands, then at the new barn standing strong against the Wyoming sky. "Me too. Baby," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Me too." 3 days after the riders left, Wesley stood in the new barn, running his hand along the smooth wood of the stall doors. The craftsmanship was remarkable, every joint tight, every surface sanded smooth. In the corner, a small plaque had been mounted, listing the names of every woman who'd worked on the construction. 147 names. Wesley had read them all multiple times, committing as many as he could to memory. The ranch felt different now. Not just physically, though the improvements were everywhere he looked. The difference was deeper, more fundamental. The oppressive silence that had defined his life here for 5 years had been replaced by something else. Not noise, but possibility. The knowledge that the world beyond his fence line wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. Lily had changed too. She talked more, smiled more easily, spent less time lost in her own thoughts. The sketches in her notebook had multiplied. Dozens of drawings of motorcycles and women with kind eyes, and the barn rising from rubble. She'd started a new project too, a scrapbook documenting the 48 hours that had changed their lives. The phone Arliss had given him rang at least once a day. Sometimes it was Arliss herself, checking in, sharing stories from the road. Other times it was riders he barely met, calling to say hello, to ask how Lily was doing, to remind him he wasn't alone. Wesley had been reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but gradually he found himself looking forward to the calls, to the connection they represented. On the fourth day, a package arrived. The delivery driver seemed confused about making the trip all the way out to the ranch, but Wesley signed for it eagerly. Inside was a leather vest, sized to fit him perfectly, with the silver Howl insignia embroidered on the back. A note from Josie was included. "You earned this. Wear it with pride." Wesley held the vest for a long time, running his fingers over the detailed stitching. He'd never been a joiner, never been part of any group or organization. The idea of wearing someone's colors felt strange, significant. But when he put it on, it fit perfectly, and something inside him settled into place. Lily squealed with delight when she saw it. "You look like one of them now. Does this mean we can go visit?" "Maybe," Wesley said, surprising himself with the answer. A week ago, the idea of leaving the ranch would have been unthinkable. Now it felt like possibility rather than threat. The repairs to the ranch weren't the only lasting changes. Word had spread in Thornwick about what the Silver Howl Riders had done. Wesley's next trip to town for supplies was different than any that had come before. People approached him, wanting to hear the story, expressing admiration for the biker's generosity. The owner of the hardware store refused to let him pay full price for anything, insisting on a permanent discount for a man who'd earned the respect of 300 road warriors. Even the town sheriff, a gruff man named Parker, who Wesley had barely spoken to in 5 years, stopped him in the parking lot. "Heard about what happened out at your place," Parker said. "That's something special. Those riders, they're good people. And what you did, opening your door like that, took guts." Wesley shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just seemed like the right thing to do." "Most people don't do the right thing when it's hard," Parker replied. "They do the easy thing, the safe thing. You did different. That matters." As Wesley drove home, Lily chattering beside him about all the people who'd said hello, he realized that his isolation hadn't just been geographical. He'd isolated himself emotionally, convinced that keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect himself and his daughter from hurt. But the hurt had found them anyway. In Sarah's abandonment, in Lily's illness, in the grinding loneliness of trying to survive alone. What he hadn't expected was that opening up, letting people in, would bring healing rather than more pain. 2 weeks after the blizzard, on a crisp morning with sun glinting off snow, Wesley heard the familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine. He stepped onto the porch, curious, and saw a single bike making its way up the driveway. As it got closer, he recognized the rider, Arliss. She pulled up to the house and removed her helmet, her familiar smile already in place. "Surprise visit. Hope that's okay." "More than okay," Wesley said, and he meant it. "What brings you back?" Arliss dismounted and pulled a folder from her saddlebag. "Official business, actually. The Silver Howl Riders are expanding. We're opening a new chapter, and we need someone to be our liaison for Wyoming and the surrounding areas. Someone who understands what we do, who we are, who embodies our values." She handed him the folder. "We want you, Wesley. Not as a rider, you don't have to get a motorcycle if you don't want to. But as someone who can coordinate shelter requests, organize local support, help women who need a safe place to go. You've got the space, the heart, and now you've got the connections." Wesley opened the folder, scanning documents that outlined a formal arrangement. The Silver Howl Riders would provide funding for converting part of his ranch into an official safe house. Women fleeing dangerous situations could come here, Stay in the guest house they'd help him build, have time to heal, and plan their next steps. In exchange, Wesley would be compensated, trained, and supported by the entire network. "You want me to turn the ranch into a shelter?" he asked, his mind racing. "A temporary one, yes. A way station. A place women can catch their breath before moving on to more permanent solutions." Orlis's expression grew serious. "Wesley, what you did for us, opening your door in a storm, that's who you are. This would just be making it official. Giving you the resources to do it right, to help more people." Wesley thought about the empty guest room, the land he barely used, the new barn with space to spare. He thought about 5 years of isolation that had taught him nothing except how to be lonely. And he thought about Lily, who'd come alive in the presence of women who'd chosen connection over fear. "What does Lily think?" Orlis asked, as if reading his mind. As if summoned, Lily appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening. "I think it's a great idea," she said firmly. "This place is too big for just us. And I liked having people here. It felt like having a big family." Wesley looked at his daughter, seeing determination and hope in her expression. When had she gotten so wise? "I need to think about it," Wesley said finally. "Of course," Orlis replied. "Take all the time you need." "But Wesley, I think you already know your answer. You just need to trust yourself enough to say yes. Just need to trust yourself enough to say yes." She stayed for lunch, sharing stories about the completion of the Albuquerque trip, the money they'd raised, the women they'd helped. Before she left, she gave Lily a gift, a silver necklace with a tiny Wolf pendant. "So you always remember you're part of the pack," Orlis said, fastening it around Lily's neck. After she left, Wesley and Lily sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the snow-covered mountains. The folder sat between them, full of possibilities and promises. "What are you going to tell her?" Lily asked. Wesley was quiet for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision and simultaneously feeling how light it made him. 5 years ago, he'd come to this ranch to hide, to protect, to survive. But survival wasn't the same as living. And living meant opening doors, taking risks, trusting that kindness given would be rewarded with community found. "I'm going to say yes," he said finally. Lily threw her arms around him, squeezing tight. "Good, because I already told Orlis you would." Wesley laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "Of course you did." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. Inside the house, the plaque from the Silver Howl Riders hung above the fireplace, a reminder of what was possible when strangers became family. Outside, the new barn stood strong against the elements, built by hands that had expected nothing, but had given everything. And in Wesley Armstrong's chest, where there had been only fear and loneliness, something new had taken root. Hope, connection, purpose. The storm had passed, but the transformation it brought would last forever. Spring arrived at Thornwick Valley Ranch, with a gentleness that seemed almost apologetic after the harshness of winter. Snow melted into rushing streams, revealing green grass beneath. Wildflowers pushed through the softening earth, painting the hillsides in purples and yellows. The mountains in the distance lost their white caps gradually, like giants shrugging off heavy coats. Wesley stood on the newly rebuilt porch, coffee mug warming his hands, watching the sunrise paint the world in shades of gold and rose. The porch was different now, expanded and reinforced, with space for multiple people to sit together. Rocking chairs that hadn't been there before lined the railing, gifts from various Silver Howl chapters. Each one had a small plaque on the back, with the name of the chapter that donated it. Behind him, he could hear activity in the kitchen. Voices, laughter, the clatter of dishes being prepared for breakfast. The sounds of a house that was no longer empty, no longer silent, no longer afraid. The guest house stood 50 yards from the main building, A new structure that had gone up in late winter with help from what felt like half of Wyoming. It had 4 private rooms, a common area, a full kitchen, and enough space for women who needed it to find safety and peace. Currently, 3 of those rooms were occupied. Maria, who'd arrived 2 weeks ago with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and fear in her eyes, was slowly beginning to smile again. She'd taken to helping with the horses, finding something therapeutic in their quiet strength. Wesley had watched her transformation, seen the tension leave her shoulders day by day. Noticed how she'd started sleeping through the night without nightmares. Sarah and her teenage daughter occupied another room, rebuilding their relationship after years of strain. The daughter, quiet and guarded at first, had bonded with Lily over art and music. Now the 2 of them spent hours together, drawing and talking about everything and nothing. The 3rd occupant was older, a woman named Grace who'd finally left her husband of 30 years. She baked compulsively, filling the ranch with the smell of bread and cookies, feeding everyone like it was her personal mission. Wesley suspected the baking was her way of processing, of creating something good when so much had been taken from her. Lily had adapted to the new arrangement with surprising ease. She'd become a sort of unofficial welcome committee, showing new arrivals around, introducing them to the horses, sharing her room when women arrived with daughters of their own. She'd grown in confidence and compassion, no longer the isolated girl, who'd known only her father's company. The sound of a motorcycle engine cut through the morning quiet. Wesley smiled before he even saw who it was. That particular engine sound had become familiar over the past months. Harleys appeared around the bend, her bike glinting in the early light. She came by twice a week now, officially to check on the safe house operations. Unofficially because she and Wesley had developed something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. She parked near the house and removed her helmet, her dark braid falling free. When she saw Wesley on the porch, her face broke into the smile that still made his heart skip. "Morning," she called, climbing the steps. "Brought supplies from the Billings chapter. And fresh coffee from that place you like." "You're a lifesaver," Wesley said, accepting the coffee. She settled into the rocking chair beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun continue its climb. "How's the house?" Harleys asked, gesturing toward the guest structure. "Full. Maria's doing better every day. Sarah and her daughter are talking again, really talking. And Grace is probably baking her 5th batch of something by now." "That's good. Really good." Harleys sipped her coffee. "You know, when we first proposed this idea, I wasn't sure you'd actually go through with it. Thought you might back out once you realized how much it would change your life." Wesley considered this. His life had changed, profoundly and irreversibly. The isolation he'd clung to for 5 years was gone. Privacy was a distant memory. Quiet was rare. His carefully controlled world had been blown wide open, and he'd never been happier. "I was scared," he admitted. "Terrified, actually. Thought letting people in would just mean more chances to get hurt, and now I realize that closing yourself off from pain also means closing yourself off from everything else. Joy, connection, purpose, love." He glanced at her on that last word, and she met his eyes with an expression that made his chest tighten. The moment was interrupted by Lily bursting through the door, already dressed and energetic despite the early hour. "Harleys, you're here. Perfect timing. Grace made cinnamon rolls and they're still warm, and Maria wants to show you what she taught Autumn to do. And oh, Dad said maybe we could all go riding later if everyone wants to." Harleys laughed, standing to ruffle Lily's hair. "Slow down, speed racer. Yes to cinnamon rolls, definitely yes to seeing Autumn's new trick, and absolutely yes to riding later." They moved inside together, into the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of the house. The kitchen was crowded with women in various stages of waking up. Grace presided over the oven like a general commanding troops. Maria poured coffee with the ease of someone who'd found her place. Sarah's daughter sat at the table sketching while her mother read the newspaper. This was Wesley's life, now full, complicated, connected. After breakfast, they all walked to the barn together. The structure stood proud against the morning sky, every board a testament to generosity and community. Inside, the horses nickered greetings. Lily led Maria and Autumn to the center area, where the mare had apparently learned to bow on command. The display earned applause and laughter from everyone gathered. They spent the morning riding through the awakening landscape. Wesley on Storm, Orlis on a horse she'd claimed as her regular mount during her visits. Lily and Sarah's daughter racing ahead on their smaller horses, the other women following at a more sedate pace. The Wyoming wilderness sprawled around them, vast and beautiful, and no longer lonely. When they returned, Wesley found a package waiting on the porch. He recognized the return address immediately. Silver Howell Riders National Headquarters. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a letter from Josie. Wesley, the letter began. This journal is for documenting the stories of the women who passed through Thornwick Valley Ranch, their journeys, their healing, their hopes. Someday these stories will matter to someone who needs to know they're not alone. Keep writing. Keep opening doors. Keep proving that kindness changes the world. You've become more than a liaison. You've become a beacon. Thank you for showing us all what's possible when one person chooses courage over fear. Wesley held the journal, feeling its weight, understanding the responsibility it represented. That evening, after dinner and dishes and the settling of the house into night rhythms, he opened to the first page. He thought about Maria's slowly returning smile, Sarah's rebuilding relationship with her daughter, Grace's therapeutic baking. And he thought about his own journey from isolation to connection. He began to write. Lily found him an hour later, still at the kitchen table with the journal open before him. She climbed into his lap despite being almost too big for it, peering at his careful handwriting. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Stories. About the people who come here, who find safety here. So others know they're not alone." Lily was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Will you write our story too? About the blizzard and the bikers, and how everything changed." Wesley kissed the top of her head. "Already did. It's the first entry." She snuggled closer. "I'm glad we're not alone anymore, Dad." "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Wesley stood on the porch one final time. Orlis joined him, having decided to stay the night in the spare room upstairs. They stood close, shoulders touching, looking out at the dark landscape dotted with the lights of the main house and guest house. "Do you ever regret it?" Orlis asked quietly. "Opening your door that night?" Wesley thought about the question seriously. He thought about the complications, the loss of privacy, the constant demands on his time and energy. He thought about how much easier life had been when it was just him and Lily, when he controlled everything, when he didn't have to care about anyone else's problems. "Not for a second," he said firmly. "That night, I thought I was just helping some people out of a storm. Turns out I was helping myself out of a different kind of storm. The kind you build in your own head. The kind that convinces you that being alone is the same as being safe." Orlis reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You saved 25 lives that night." "You saved 2, Wesley replied. "Mine and Lily's. Reminded us that the world still had good people in it. That taking risks could lead to something beautiful instead of just more pain." They stood together in the comfortable silence that had developed between them, the kind that only came from truly knowing someone. In the distance, a coyote howled and another answered. The sound that once would have emphasized Wesley's isolation now felt like a reminder that no one was truly alone. Inside, the journal waited for more stories. The guest house held women finding their strength. The barn housed horses that helped with healing. And on the porch, A man who'd once thought walls were protection discovered that bridges were better. The blizzard that brought 25 bikers to his door had changed everything. But the real transformation wasn't in the rebuilt barn or the new guest house or the supplies that filled his pantry. It was in Wesley Armstrong's willingness to be changed, to let strangers become family, to believe that opening your door could lead to opening your heart. As stars emerged overhead and the temperature dropped toward another cold night, Wesley felt Orla shiver slightly and pulled her closer. She leaned into him and they stood there together. Two people who'd both learned that courage to be vulnerable was the greatest strength of all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new guests, new opportunities to choose kindness over fear. But tonight, standing on a porch built by 300 women who'd once been strangers, Wesley Armstrong was exactly where he was meant to be. Home, connected, whole. And finally, after so many years of running from pain, he discovered something worth running toward instead. A life filled with purpose, community, and the simple, profound truth that we're all just looking for someone to open the door when the storm is raging outside. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload.